Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to read the book Mrs. Katz and Tush by Patricia Polacco, one of my favorite authors, as many of you know. But before we get started, I want to make sure we go over some things that we have learned throughout the year. Remember, readers, when we read, we want to make sure you understand the story. How do we do that? You give yourself a comprehension check. You ask yourself, who was in the story? What is happening? Why? And where are they? You want to make sure you're constantly asking yourself these questions as you're reading. Also, thinking, what mind work is this text signaling me to do? What does it want me to think about? Another thing, predicting what will happen next. It's always helpful to make predictions as you read, because not only does it make you more involved in what you're reading, but it helps keep you engaged, meaning that you want to keep reading in order to find out if your prediction was correct. So make sure you're always making predictions. Also, retelling the big part of the book. So when you are reading and you pick it up the next day, you want to make sure you go back and read where you left off. You want to remind yourself what is happening in your story. Okay, so for today's book, we're going to be making inferences. I will refer to details in the text when making inferences from the text. What is an inference? We have heard this word before. When you make an inference, you go beyond the author's words to understand what is not said in the text. Okay? Readers have to use story clues and background knowledge to make an inference. In other words, boys and girls, you are reading in between the lines. So an inference is you are gathering clues. You are gathering the clues that the author is giving you in his text. The clues from the author, you connect it with what you already know about that clue, okay? And then you make an inference, meaning, I've used this example before. Let's say that you see a girl walking down the street and she's holding an umbrella, okay? The skies are gray. What is the first thing you're gonna think about? Oh, it's gonna rain today. You just made an inference. That is an inference because you gathered the clues. What were the clues? The clues was the umbrella that the girl was holding. The second clue were the gray skies, okay? What is your background knowledge? What you know about umbrellas. What do you use an umbrella for? To keep you from getting wet when it rains, right? So you just made an inference there. You gathered the clues with what you know about umbrellas. That is an inference. So I'm going to give you another example. Oh, sorry, here we go. I want to make sure you understand what is not an inference, though, before I give you my second example. An inference is not a prediction. You are not predicting anything, because predictions are basically guesses. You're making a guess if you're making a prediction. They also don't rely on clues. So you don't want to say that you're making a prediction if you're using clues and background knowledge. That is making an inference. You're also not stating the obvious that you see, an obvious observation. You must have evidence from the text. I use the word evidence all the time with you guys. You say a character is mean, show me the evidence. Where in that text tells me or shows me that the character is mean? You're giving me evidence. You always want to make sure you have backup to what you say. Okay. So I'm going to give you another example. Let's say you see a little girl like this. You're at a wedding and you see a little girl like this. She's dressed up very nice. She's dressed up like the wedding party, similar colors, and she has flowers with her. Okay. Let's say that you are there and you see this little girl walking by. What is the first thought that's going to come to your head? Oh, now she must be the flower girl. Okay. What made me think that? The first clue was she has a dress that looks like the wedding party, and she has flowers with her. Okay, those are the two clues. What is the background knowledge? If you have gone to weddings before, or if you've seen them in movies, you know that there's always a flower girl. Okay, so you just made an inference by saying, I know that flower girls at weddings typically have flowers, and they typically look like the wedding party, meaning they're wearing the same colors as the rest of the bridesmaids or the bride. So you kind of see those things. You're connecting what you already know about the clues that you see. That is making an inference. Okay. So now that we have done that, I do want to say that I would like you to use these sentences. The story said blank, that is your evidence, which made me think blank, that is your inference. Okay, you want to use these sentences to gather your thoughts, to organize them. I think blank, which is your inference, will happen because blank, that is your evidence. Okay, you want to use these sentence starters to help you. Now, let's move on to the story. Patricia Polacco by Mrs. Katz and Tush. Larnell didn't know Mrs. Katz very well, but almost every other day his mother stopped in to see her after work. Since her husband died, she's so alone, his mother had told him. Mrs. Katz held tight to his mother's hand the day they looked at an old photo album. That's my husband, Myron, said Mrs. Katz. He came from Poland like me a long time ago. We had such a life, such a life. Then her voice broke. We had no children, and I'll be all alone for Hanukkah and Passover. Then she cried. The next day, Larnell stopped in to see her himself. I've been thinking, he said. A cat has some kittens in the basement of our building. We found someone to take them all except this one. She's the runt. Nobody wants her because she's so ugly. She doesn't even have a tail. Ugly, you say, Mrs. Cat said. My Myron was ugly too when he was little, but he grew up to be such a person. Mrs. Katz looked at the little kitten. Scrawny little bubbler, so small, no tail, she said as she examined the kitten closely. I don't know, she said doubtfully. Then she saw the look on Larnell's face. Larnell, I'll take her, she announced, but only if you'll come and help me with her. I've never had a cat before. Larnell promised. A good Yiddish name I'll give her, said Mrs. Katz. Let's see. She has no tail. All you see is her tush. That's it. We'll call her Tush. Okay, boys and girls, I want to make an inference here. I think that Mrs. Katz wants to be friends with Larnell when she says, but only if you come and help me with her. I've never had a cat before. Now, I think that because when you invite someone over to your house, You don't invite in a complete stranger. You don't invite someone that you don't want to that you don't want in your home. You invite people whose company you enjoy, and typically those people are either family or friends. So this makes me think that if Miss Cat is inviting Larnell over to help her, I think that she wants to be friends with him. I don't know, but that is the inference that I'm going to see if it's correct. Okay, now let's keep reading. Little Tush grew healthy and strong. Mrs. Cat cooked for her, brushed her, knitted toys for her, and even read to her. Such a person, she'd say as she watched Tush play. Mrs. Cat was in love. Larnell kept his promise. He visited Mrs. Katz and Tush every day. After school, there was always a fresh baked kugel and a tall glass of milk waiting for him. But as much as he grew to love Tush, he also loved to listen to Mrs. Katz talk about the old country and the way times used to be. I come from Warsaw. That's in Poland, you know. I came here to work sewing dresses in the garment district for my cousin Moishi. I didn't speak one word of English. Then how did you talk to people? Asked Larnell. I didn't, she answered. Allah, I cried in those days until I met Myron. He asked me to marry him after he tasted my kugel. I believe that, Larnell said as he ate some. Myron and I used to vacation in the Catskills, a borscht resort, you know, a place for Jews to stay. You mean Jules couldn't stay anywhere they wanted to? Larnell asked. Okay, boys and girls, here, I want you to make an inference. I want you to think about what can you infer about Mrs. Cat's past, about her culture or childhood, when she says, Myron and I used to vacation in Catskills, a borscht resort, you know, a place for Jews to stay. When she says the word Jews, what does she mean? What does that tell you about her culture or her childhood? I want you to make an inference. Okay? I'm going to give you some think time. I want you to use I think, that's your inference, because that's your evidence. So, what do you think about Mrs. Cat's past? What kind of things could she have gone through? Okay, so I'm going to continue reading. Hold on to your inference, boys and girls, and we're going to check to see if our inference was correct. So he asked, you mean Jules couldn't stay anywhere they wanted to? Larnell asked. Mrs. Katz didn't answer. Instead, she went to a trunk and pulled out some old clothes. My grandma told me about the places she couldn't stay either, Larnell said softly. Larnell, your people and mine are alike, you know. Trouble we've seen, happiness too, great strength we've had. You and I are alike, so much alike. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, the Catskills. We used to dress every Sunday and have a costume ball, said Mrs. Katz. Then she put a record on the record player. It was old and scratched. You hear that, Larnell? She said. That is what we used to dance to. It's a dance from my homeland. Here, I'll show you. They whirled around the room and laughed and giggled. As the weeks passed, Larnell spent more and more time with Mrs. Katz. Since you're almost family to me, Larnell, she said one day, I want you to come with me to say Kaddish for my Myron. I know you're not Jewish, but Myron would have liked you. You're such a person, Larnell. At the cemetery, she read from her book. Then she asked Larnell to put a small rock on top of Mr. Cat's headstone. We do this to remember, she said softly. Shalom, my Marin, she murmured and wiped tears from her face. On the way home, she announced, Kugel, such a kugel I baked for you today, Larnell. Hurry, Tush will be worried for us, she said as they walked. When they got home, they called and called for Tush, but she didn't come. They looked everywhere for her. Suddenly, Mrs. Katz gasped. The window to the fire escape was open. Oh no, she cried. I forgot to shut the window before I left. Poor Bubba, she has never been outside. We'll find her, Larnell tried to reassure her. She has been acting strange lately, Mrs. Katz said through her tears. She has been trying to get out, but I was afraid that she would get hit by a car. I'll find her, Mrs. Katz, Larnell said. I won't let you down. Okay, boys and girls, so I am going to stop here. The story is pretty long, so I want us to continue the story on Wednesday. However, and to check if our inferences were correct. We'll do that on Wednesday. However, on Google Classroom, I have set that up for you. You have an assignment there for this first part of the story. They are questions, comprehension questions for you to answer. Those are due on Friday. So please make sure you work on them before we get to the second part of the story so that you're not overwhelmed trying to finish the assignment, okay? So I will stop here and I will continue our story on Wednesday, okay? Have a wonderful day, boys and girls.